be on YouTube and confirm this. I'm like kind of afraid to
Yeah,
touch
yeah.
my
I
computer.
got it open.
Um, and no, it crashes for weird things. It crashes when I try
Yeah,
to
we're
like
live.
change.
We're live.
Okay, yeah, it crashes when I try to change like the properties for the video feed, etc., etc. Okay, let's just bring up the chat, and then we will go. Just a second. Chat. Oh, docs. Chat. Here we go. Uh, go. Okay. Oh yeah. All right. It's not gonna let me bring the chat in without crashing. That's for sure. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. Here we go. Best we can on a janky, albeit updated copy of OBS. How's everyone doing? I missed you last week.
Doing good. Good to be here. Excited for
Yeah,
this episode.
Shall we roll?
doing great. Yes, please.
Jumping straight into it. Katamari this week. Big one that we've talked about for a long time. Um,
Big episode.
so look, jumping straight into it. Um, this was a game. I mean, almost from the day that we decided that we wanted to make this channel and start talking about video games every week, this was one of the first games that everybody mentioned that they wanted to talk about. Like, not just us, but also our friends. And this was one we've all played it, but why don't you guys tell me what was it about this game that you were so excited to play on stream? Why this one?
I mean, I can talk to it a little bit. I think that the for me, two things. I think that Keita Takahashi, right, who's the game designer behind this, has such a strong voice, right? You have this very strong feeling of a kind of an artist at work, right? Or a individual personality, kind of auteurist kind of um voice happening. And the you combine that with the fact that it feels, on one hand, super fresh in terms of game design. It's a totally non-genre, totally unfamiliar game mechanic, but at the same time feels super idiomatic to video games, right? It's video gamey as hell. It's not a walking simulator with sad music, right? It's like this kind of cute Japanese with this like wild kind of jazz kind of soundtrack. Um, but at the same time, like very singular and strange and interesting.
Yeah, that's really that's very succinct as usual, Matt. Like this is it's weird as hell. And it's still a game. And actually, almost everything that we've played become weird as hell by veering, like, by taking game things, game idioms, as you say, and steering them into not a game, right? And then that resulting collision of gameness and not gameness is what makes it weird or is what makes it art, right? And to use just some of the examples that we've talked about, already, all the David O'Reilly things were like that, taking away game things in order to create a weird experience that defied expectations. The Jody artworks, like essentially taking away gamey things to create, I mean, different kind of experience. I think that the Jody pieces go beyond that. But this is definitely a game.
It also it passed a cultural threshold
Mhm.
where like for instance, like I think in the '90s of games like Myst or like a TV show like Twin Peaks, where I was a kid, so I didn't like I understood that these were these things that were they were of an entertainment medium, but they were held in some reverence that kind of transcended like a kind of a niche group of people like like I didn't get missed as a kid, where I felt like this was the first kind of game that transcended the games that people were playing, and that like to people that weren't playing games, they were really interested in it for its novelty and how weird or how fun it was. Um, and like it felt like for me, it also maybe felt like the first game that kind of truly embodied that. Like there could have been moments from games that I played before this that were funny or had like interesting critiques, but this is the one that like felt it totally embodied it, and like so maybe it's like later when like indie games became something that I could point to, I would look back and think about this in those terms or something of like a kind of an artistic vision from one person that I understood just in playing it.
Yeah, so it's
I think
probably
that's actually, yeah, just to jump in real quick on that, like kind of putting it before indie games, right? So this came out on the PS2. Um, I think, well, I can look up the date, but like maybe 2003 or 2006. But this was definitely predated the major wave of indie games. And actually, I was just talking to my friend Josh, who was the lead developer on Night Run, together with me. And I mentioned that we were doing Katamari today, and he was like, super excited. And he was saying, he was like, yeah, I remember when Katamari came out, or before it came out, actually, they showed it at GDC, and a bunch of his developer friends were bugging out about it because they had seen it before it released, and they were like, oh, this is like the craziest thing I've ever seen, and it's so good. And it led the indie game wave, actually, even though it was like a Namco backed Japanese game. It kind of was like, I think, a key moment prior to the actual indie game wave of this kind of like a tourist aestheticized, strikingly original, but still very much video game um, piece.
so. Can you tell us? Do you know at all how this game happened? Like, how does this come into the world? So again, you said this was what year did you say this was?
You know what? I was just looking at it. Let me pull it up so I can say it right. I think it's like either 2003 or 2006.
Yeah, and
Let me
as you
just
look it
I think
up,
I thought it was
what
earlier than that. I
it
was thinking
let
like
me find
2001,
it. Oh
2002.
no, 2004. Katamari Damacy was on PS2 in 2004, and then they did a sequel, We Love Katamari, in 2005, which I guess is what we're playing, right?
And so it was worth like as Travis was describing, I mean, I guess both of you were describing this thing being pretty much unprecedented. The indie game scene hasn't really taken its current form yet. Like, and you're explaining to us a little bit about what kind of world this was released into. So this is Bandai Namco's a pretty like a pretty big publisher, and more so in I think in 2004, right? Because they were doing what's which of the fighting genres is them, and they have like the Ridge Racer.
Tekken.
Yeah, they have Tekken, they have Ridge Racer. Like these guys are making the triple. I'm really stuck in this level, by the way. I'm not doing a good job. um,
Also, I
right?
mean, just look at this visually, right? Like, I
Why
just am
can't I get
so
out?
pleased by the visual output of this game. This is like this rotating, rolling ball. I feel like also as like a 3D game, right? As like an
Mm-hmm.
early 3D game, really using 3D in a meaningful way, where it's just so fun to interact with this weird, uneven ball, and like 3D physics, right? Like it's just there's so much going on here that was so good.
Yeah, let's talk a
I
little
was
bit.
just
Sorry, let's talk a little bit about like this gameplay. Although I'm making really bad television right now because I can't figure out where to go. And normally the levels are a little bit more laid out than this. But a couple of things that jump out to you right away, obviously are the visuals. But to go some things that you don't take for granted. It's a weird control scheme, right? Like it is really weird. You use both of your thumbsticks, right, to push or rotate or go backwards or strafe, and
Kind of
even
tank
that's
tank
hmm?
controls, right?
What's that?
It's kind of tank controls.
Yeah. And if you were, why am I really struggling? I have five, like, why am I struggling so hard? Oh, I
There's
have to
one
find
item
one.
remaining.
Oh, I just haven't found the one thing that makes me
I
go.
think it's that present. You got to get up on the ledge.
Oh,
Go up the
okay.
keyboard.
Um, and right, and it's like if you were making a game about, moving a big ball around these obstacle courses, the intuitive thing to do would be go like driving game controls with an accelerate button and then you steer with one stick. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, roll up
Um,
on there.
right? But these are like you sort of the controls are, I want to say counterintuitive, but in a good way. Oh, I
Mm,
still need another thing. Maybe I can roll down this way. Um, and yeah, just the way that all the things that you add into your ball sort of mess with the physics and they make it more clumsy, they make it more awkward.
yeah.
It's like that's also really counterintuitive.
Yeah, the
But
awkwardness is really an interesting dimension of the bumpy movement of the
mhm.
ball. I think is a really characteristic aspect. Go under the bed. Try going under the bed. I think there might be something under there. Can you go like
Can't get the slipper.
I just love this art style so much.
It is so good. Another thing about this is, oh yeah, maybe in here.
No, maybe
There we
not.
go. Oh my gosh. So that was a bad playthrough, guys. You know, this also just feels like a person who loves making LOD models. You know,
Yeah.
uh, like there are so many different models of so much little junk, so many little trinkets in here, and they're all kind of delightful. They all have just perfect art style in terms of being just detailed enough to know what they are. Everything is presented in its like most cutesy platonic form.
Yeah.
That part is really great. Shades of everything. Um, Although this obviously would have preceded David O'Reilly's Everything that we played in our first episode.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
mean, I think this just to situate this historically, right? So this was 2004, and then we didn't see Braid and Fez and Meat Boy until 2000. Braid was 2008, right? So this is 4 years before the kind of, start of the like console indie game wave.
So I found out some interesting thing about like the development of this recently on Eggplant Podcast. They're like talking about the most recent GDC, and they talked about something that I wasn't familiar with called the Experimental Games Workshop, which is something that happens every GDC, and that this actually was there in like 2002 or 2003. So
Yeah.
like the community for all this stuff, and like it's like I guess I don't follow that. I wasn't following and I haven't followed that like era of game development and indie game development because it's like I know this wasn't alone. I know there were like lots of people working on games at this time in this capacity, but it was interesting to hear that like the creator of this was already kind of working within a community of like showing this out, like showing it and trying it out, getting feedback from that, and yeah, and so and then talking about the art direction and the like the interior of this like Japanese room, like everything, like it was a game that when I would show it to people or people that weren't into games still really like this, and it was like one of the experiences. Like I feel like I could always talk to people about Katamari more than I could about like I don't know Final Fantasy Tactics, right? It's gonna the it appeals to a much wider range of people, and I'm did y'all have that experience too? Like it's like I feel like this is like
Absolutely.
yeah.
I was going to say, I feel like there's something so accessible about this game, maybe because it sort of is original in all these ways that doesn't reference other video games, that you don't feel like if you're not a video game person, this isn't for you, that sort of
Yeah.
everybody's equally alienated and equally able to access it. And I don't even know. I mean, I keep thinking of like, and I'm probably using this phrase wrong, like first principles or something. It feels like a video game made by somebody who's never played a video game in like the best possible way. And so it sort of like approaches things with like no biases, like totally fresh, just like original. You're like, oh, I didn't even think that that's what a video game would or could be. It's like, I think that's what's so magical about it. It's sort of like how did this get made was what you just asked, Mitch, and like, and in some ways it's like literally who approves this, and
yeah.
also like who thought of this, and like who actually did the work to make this. I can't believe that they just kept going, and they like somebody kept greenlighting this because it's absurd, but obviously it's like brilliant, and like there's no prior art to justify that this is a good idea or it's going to work or it's going to be successful. And one of my favorite things about it is that it occupies this space of like you mentioned like cult TV shows or cult films. Like it's every artist's favorite video game. It's like
Mhm.
has such a cult status, but it's extremely commercially successful at the same time. It's able to do all of these things simultaneously in such a like a beautiful and like humble way in a way, and it's like so simple but so powerful. And I think that it really like opened up the space for, as you said, the indie game wave, but also just like this is a whole new form of game, the accumulation game. And there's been all sorts of like copycats or like inspired games afterwards, but it really just opened things up in such a daring and like crazy, surprising way.
Also,
I
why do you see the front of him when you're talking about like first principle? Like you see him, the character running from behind, but you also get this view of them on the bottom right. That's like, what's that about?
I know. Like
It's
why
great.
Just
It's
why
just so you can
so,
see their face, like just so you
yeah,
can
I
see
think
the art.
so. Just like, yeah,
well, the
It's
weird
a
thing
very
about
interesting
this,
decision.
there's so much, it's so funny in some way, right? This is a game about cleaning up clutter. It's probably about something else really deep down, or maybe it's not. I believe the developer has said no, it's not really about anything. Um, and yet this game has so much clutter in it. Like there's so much crap in this game that from like a from a game designer standpoint, you don't need, including that little guy in the corner so we can see like what he's doing. I can see that he's running. I know he's running. My ball is moving. I can see his behind. The text that comes up like from the kings of all cosmos. And we should get into the plot of this game and the characters at some point, cuz I think that it is delightful and important, and maybe even more important because it is so extraneous and unimportant. Um, there's all this dialogue. Look, this is the best part. So now my Katamari has gotten big enough that I can go into another area, but there's a loading time in the middle of the level, and the king of all cosmos, our narrator, is just letting me know, you can't talk during loading, you know. We finally have our voice back, but we can't talk when it first starts loading. Like, and we know the rest of the level has already loaded. Like we know it didn't take that long. I just also have to click through like 6 dialogue boxes to let me know that the loading screen is over. That's terrible design, terrible user experience in every way, except in Katamari, where it's just so charming, and so of a piece with what this game seems to be about, vibe
Wait,
wise.
will you go back in front of a wall or something that blocks your view?
Oh yeah,
Does the hole that it makes, is it in the shape of a heart?
yeah, yeah.
I
That's
never
What?
noticed that.
the X-ray
the
You see
view.
vignette.
that?
Yeah, look at that.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah, through
Oh
like if your
wow.
that's
view is
so cool.
occluded, your window is a little heart. And yeah, it's just
Sorry to
full.
interrupt. Another example though.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's just full
exactly,
of details that
exactly.
don't need to be there. Some are additive to the experience, some are like actually subtractive to the experience. Like that loading screen thing is dumb. Like they shouldn't do, but
Although I do think it's important. I remember playing this on the PS2, and there is a bunch of funky stuff in here that they were doing to work around loading and like crazy kind of slowdowns and hitches. When you get to a certain size, it's like reloads the level in the middle of the game with all the smaller models and
yeah.
stuff. Like this was also a technical stretch for sure. Like now we look at it and it all looks very simple, but if we think about this in the context of the PS2, this was pushing the hardware at that time, which I
Yeah,
think is
good
also
call.
relevant.
Thousands of 3D models, right? And then the whole game world shifting in scale. And it's I get the impression that the way everything, I mean, once again, the aesthetic follows the technical requirements of the
Yes.
software, right? Things have to be low poly in order to even now have I gotten so big that I'm not even there we go. Um,
And this
right?
like
Things
low
have to be low
poly, flat
detail.
shaded look was really now is almost is a big cliche in indie games as like a retro low poly look.
Hmm.
But at the time, this was pretty unique.
Yeah.
This kind of like drawn texture, basically no lighting, kind of 3D cartoon was this was like an early kind of like leaning into the idioms of 3D as an aesthetic itself.
Yeah, and it's worth noting. I mean, these are fun to do if you ever mess around in Blender. Like making low poly models is something that I find a lot of fun. And it is stuff like, so those bottles, you want to make those as low poly as possible. But once now my character's gotten bigger, and you're gonna have to have even more things in the world, and you're gonna need a different version of that bottle model that has even fewer polygons, because the detail
Yeah,
won't be seen
exactly.
anyway. You got to save vertices count. And so that's everything that's modeled here. The game developer is going to have to actually model it three or four or five or six times, each with different levels of detail, right? That's the LOD model.
Just a casual dinosaur
I
too.
just love that lizard, that like lizard with the neck frill. Some rabbits, no big deal.
Now,
Yeah, no, it's go
Matto,
ahead,
I
man.
was just going to say, if you have the Wikipedia entry open, can you read us like the plot of Katamari?
Yes, absolutely. All right, let me get there. Hold on. Okay. Let's see the plot. Okay, I think it's kind of mixed in with gameplay and setting. So here we go. Okay. In most Katamari games, players typically control the player character, the prince, as he is ordered to do various tasks by his father, the king of all cosmos. In Katamari Damacy, the prince is tasked with the job of rebuilding the stars and constellations that the king destroyed. To do this, the player combines as many objects into a singular ball, known as a Katamari ball, that could become a star, constellations, or stardust. A Katamari ball can roll up certain objects depending on the Katamari's relative size to them. Players typically control the Katamari ball using two analog sticks. Players move forward and backward by pushing the analog sticks in that direction simultaneously. Oh yeah, it's not tank controls. That's right. I forgot. It's a
Yeah.
weirder
Yeah, it's,
thing.
it's
Yeah.
it's weird controls. It's just like Billy said. It's like the person who made this had never played a video game before, doesn't understand how most people want to use the controller, and it's weird. It takes some getting used to.
I mean, I guess it's funny. They describe it as tank controls, but I don't think that's traditional tank controls is one stick moves and one stick rotates, I think.
Yeah, it rotates
Or maybe it's
view.
not. No, 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 no. It's you have two treads. You're like moving
Oh,
one tread
right.
independently. So I guess it is tank like regular tank controls. They can turn the Katamari by pushing only one stick in the desired direction or pushing the sticks in opposite directions to do so faster, often described as tank controls. Player may also do a 180-degree turn that causes the prince to jump on the other side of the Katamari, typically by pressing the two sticks down into the controller. Players may cause the Katamari to roll at high speeds, typically by rapidly moving the two sticks in opposite directions back and forth. Players may also cause the prince to jump and get a better look at the world by pressing L1. Introduced in Katamari Forever, players are given the ability called the Prince Hop to make the Katamari ball hop. Okay. Before each level, the king will go on a nonsensical rant to the prince and refers to himself using the royal we. In Make a Star levels, players are presented with a specific size that the Katamari must be before the time limit runs out. Let's see, I'm trying to get more of the story.
Yeah.
This is like kind of a
No,
description of the mechanic.
you've jogged my memory. You've jogged my memory, because I remember. So I'm actually playing Katamari Damacy Reroll, right, PS5 version.
Yeah.
My ear
Oh, did we lose you?
my earbuds fell out because my ears
The
are
other
too
thing I'll just
big.
take from the Wikipedia while Mitch is
Yeah.
recovering is that Keita Takahashi was an art student and a sculptor before making video games. So it says Keita Takahashi, the series creator, did not go into coding originally. He created quote unquote cheerfully bizarre sculptures when he was a student at Musashino Art University. This inspired Takahashi to entertain audiences with his creations and decided to join Namco as a visual artist. He wanted to
Okay.
create a game where the players can do something they can only do in a game and create something that is not formulaic, which is well done, Mr. Takahashi. Or Mr. Keita, I guess,
Oh
as
no.
the Japanese naming convention may go.
Oh, hold on.
So that throws an interesting twist on our not to preempt our is it art question for the
No, that's
end,
good.
but that the creator was an artist and a sculptor prior to joining Namco.
It's just such a big jump to go from being a sculptor to making this, right? Where we've said the sculpture, i.e., the 3D modeling of this, is so minimalist and simple in response to the technical requirements. So for a sculptor who's not a coder to make a video game, like this is kind of the complete opposite game I would expect that person to make. Like actually we see this all the time, that most, artists or sculptors, when they go into creating 3D, like they tend to just make these immersive worlds, right? I mean, I'm sorry to generalize, but I think we do see a lot of it where they want to create these beautiful high fidelity, oh, look at what's possible sculpturally in inside virtual world. Look at how I can sculpt in the metaverse and create these impossible physics and things like that. Almost nobody goes into like a virtual space from a sculptural background and says, yeah, oh, I see. I'm going to do a lot less sculpting, like a lot less detailed, a lot more technically simplistic work in order to take advantage of the interactive portions of the medium. Like that's really odd, I think. But plot
Yeah,
wise,
absolutely.
you jogged my memories. I was going to say before my ear pods fell out of my apparently oversized ears. I remember, so we're playing Katamari Damacy Reroll, which is some sequel, remake, whatever, PS5, where they didn't even bother optimizing for loading times, apparently. But I recall, yes, the plot of original Katamari Damacy, was that this guy, the king of all cosmos, went on a drunken bender, and he doesn't remember, but he destroyed all of the stars in the universe, and yet somehow there are still rooms with junk in them. And the only way to replace the stars is to roll up junk into your Katamari ball, and then he can transform them into planets or stars or stardust or something like that. That is the plot. You as the prince, I guess you are, apparently this is your dad right here. Nobody
Yeah, it's your dad. Yeah.
yeah, nobody explains why they have rolled up carpets for heads, like with faces. I've never seen,
I
like,
have an answer to that. I have
you,
an answer
oh,
for that.
okay, I want to know.
Only because I like front ran your Wikipedia reading. So the characters were first developed as part of his like work on a game called Action Drive that was inspired by Crazy Taxi. And so he had first come up with the king and the queen and the prince. The queen gets kidnapped and goes to Earth, and the lazy king sends the prince to go rescue her.
Mhm.
And the prince's head is a hammer, and he uses the hammer to bash people. And then he takes a steering wheel and he shoves it into the back of people's heads, and then drives them around on the planet Earth to cause chaos and try to find his mom.
Oh,
And
that sounds
the project,
great.
yeah, right. The project got canceled apparently, but he kept the idea for the characters, and saw apparently a demo of a project called Denzen, which was like a young girl floating around on islands to various connected power lines. That combined with the tradition in Japanese schools, sports days, there's a game called apparently Tamakoragashi, where you roll around a big ball
Mm.
into a goal. All the students are. All of that sort of got combined into the concept, and he like pitched it to a colleague who liked it, but he was in the art department and not the game design department, and so apparently he had to like attend this Konami Computer Entertainment School in Los Angeles that actually also was responsible for making like Guitar Freak and Dance Dance Revolution
Mm.
before I think the game was able to get put into the actual pipeline to be made.
It's still
Fascinating.
wild to me that it got made, like even despite all that sort of paying of dues.
I feel like Crazy Taxi is actually a good reference for this. That's interesting that's explicitly called out, because I do feel like that is very much in the spirit of obviously as a distant ancestor, but that actually makes sense.
I just
There's
want to
also sort
point.
of like a sub team inside of Namco called Now Production that like barely happened and was like totally bootstrapped and like barely funded. So it seems like it's actually a miracle that it did happen, and it and almost like tangentially associated with like the more high production AAA Namco sort of titles, which all kind of checks out too. Like, where did this slip through? And I guess through a subsidiary kind of process makes a lot of sense.
So
Only
I
only took a year and a half to develop.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane.
That's
How do I get
crazy.
out? Okay, I want to say I have actually. Oh, I'm a planet rolling up other planets now. Okay, I was gonna say I have no idea what's happening in the game right now. That like weird level I'd never seen before in this remake. Okay, but apparently now I'm a planet rolling up other planets, and then the king was very mad at me. Um, yeah, the yes. I was asking that stuff about the plot, and I want to come back to the development and to Takahashi a little bit later. But just to say, when I was replaying this last night in anticipation of the stream, I was thinking about what Matt says about, how Matt plays games, right? How he always, um, I don't have the maximum number of planets, right? Just skips over the dialogue. This has so much extraneous dialogue, but like it is so great. And one of the things that is also weird about it is that the sort of central narrative character, the King of all Cosmos, like he is tempestuous and childlike and mean, and now he's gonna zap me. He's constantly disappointed me. Like it's just the game constantly negs you. Like it constantly negs you. It
Well,
constantly
and that
says,
it's your father, right? That it's your father who is this like chaotic drunk figure. I mean, that is like there's definitely some Freudian stuff going on there. I mean, I think, but I gotta say, in contrast to my usual kind of narrative hating, I feel like the narrative of Katamari is very like memorable. Like the relationship of this chaotic father and the tiny son who's like desperately trying to please him, I find very kind of memorable and emotional.
it is, and I'm not sure that it's like I'm not sure that it's anything except like the most vibey filler. Like I'm not sure it's trying to be profound or has a specific thesis that it's trying to submit. It's just more like delightful junk like inside the game space. Maybe, I don't know. Um I wanted to on all of this. I was actually messaging with Zachary Small to ask him if he wanted to come in as a special guest this week because he did an interview, a fairly rare interview with Takahashi for the New York Times, um, that was published a while back, and so he had some stories. And unfortunately, he's in a meeting. But shout out and go check out his interview in this small upstart publication, the New York Times. But Billy, like you have some stories with Takahashi, do you not? Like you connected with him one time, didn't you?
I did actually went through my email in preparation for this to try to find it's Kita Takahashi has sent you a message on Facebook, dot, 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 subject line, February 12th, 2010. Subject, hi, this is Kita. Thank you for your message. You seem to be interesting, but I don't have a lot of money. Smiley face. I also don't have the company of me. I am one person and employees of Namco. Now, Namco is a deficient, so I cannot employ you. However, we think that we can make something together. I have a friend who lives in New York. I haven't been to New York. In future, if I will be able to meet you in New York, it is glad. So that is a coveted message my life. We did not end up working together, unfortunately. But like I said last time, my favorite thing to do is just contact people whose work I loved and be like, can I just? I'll work for you for free if I have to, but can I just work for you? Like I want to be close to this thing that I love, and so I got such a illustrious internship and employment list out of my life, and almost had it with Takahashi.
That's so amazing. Also, we need to turn this into an official segment, which is just Billy reads his personal correspondence through the years. This
I
is-
gotta say
I
though,
didn't.
that is like in terms of like advice to young people, the Billy Rennekamp,
yeah,
like just taking really weird internships with brilliant artists is like a great method, the Rennekamp method.
yeah.
I recommend enough.
Yeah. Life
Um, that after Katamari, though, I mean, I remember following for a while, and it seemed like he wanted to go back to making sculptures. He did a couple like I think a goal was to make children's playgrounds, and he finally got commissioned to build some. I saw some photographs of those at one point. But then he did come back and continue to make games. I mean, we've got the sort of extension of Katamari, which I assume happened right afterwards. But then Nobi Nobi Boy was 2009. I never
Mm.
saw Glitch, Enya Teens, or Alphabet or World, but I saw Wadum.
Yeah.
Um, and I've never seen Crankin' Time's Travel Adventure. Apparently, there's a TBA of what a game called To a T. Most of these don't have links, though. I'm not sure. Have you guys encountered many of his other works?
So I had
I
not.
played,
I
yeah.
never played with Tom until this week when I got it to prepare for this stream, and we're gonna play it for a bit. Maybe this is maybe after this roll, maybe we'll do an interval and then we'll switch over to Watam. But I hadn't played any of his other work. I know the Crank game is for Playdate. The Playdate, which is just like it is the folia of game platforms, I would say. Like it is for whatever ends up on Playdate tends to be like the European fine artists of indie developers. Oh, see,
Oh, you
exactly.
got one. There we
Obviously,
go.
Billy
Yeah.
has one. Do you play that much, Billy?
No, and honestly, I'm a little embarrassed, but I think it's because there's no backlight. And most of the time when I play it, it's like a nightcap kind of thing, and I'm in bed. I'm like, God damn it, I can't see the fucking screen. But I've been traveling around with it a bunch. I really liked the way they did releases, where kind of every day they would give you a free title. Otherwise, there's a game store where titles are like $5. Really, really great format. Love the interface. The game categories are all over the place. I did not realize that he was involved in one, Crankin's Time Travel Adventure. I'm gonna wait a minute. Did I play that one? Let me look up what it looks like.
It's just
I think
like,
it's like one of the games that came with it. Like it was one of the first ones.
Oh my God, I did play this one. This one was wild. This
oh
was one of the
yeah,
craziest concepts.
oh
Yeah.
man,
Um, okay. Are you all familiar with it at all?
no.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so you wake up on a couch, you're this weird guy, and then you start cranking and it makes time move forward. And so he like opens a door and goes outside. And then he's just like walking, and the faster you do it, the faster he walks. Then there's like elements of the world which somehow like either fully or partially defy the passage of time. And so like while you're walking, there's like going to be a bird that starts flying towards you, and the bird is like, at a level playing field. And while you walk, your body goes up and down. So you have to like crank it until he's on the downstroke, and then wait till the bird passes, and then you like keep cranking so it's on the upstroke. And so there's like things like that happens. You're basically like dodging elements in the world which don't fully sync to your concept of time. And then every time you mess up, it starts the beginning. You have to like run forward, and he's always on his way to meet his girlfriend. And so at the end of each level, you like arrive at a cafe, and he's of course late. And so she just gets madder and madder. So it's this, race against time, although you're like weirdly fully in control of the time and constantly battling time and constantly losing.
Billy, you sound like a person who just tried marijuana for the first time. That's how you sound describing that game.
And my girlfriend's so mad at me.
We got to
It's
figure out how to do a Playdate episode, just because like there's so many, like luxury like fine art indie games on there. Like the new isn't the new Lucas Pope game on there? It just came out recently. That was the big get for them. How do they do it, man? How do they get everybody to create games specifically for this weird platform that has like 50,000 users? I don't know.
Well, I mean, you know the history of the company, right? Panic
No.
Software.
They made
I've been using
Transmit.
them. They made
I've been using them
Transmit,
for I've been using them for a long time.
the best file transfer protocol application out there since 2004 or something crazy. They have like three extremely well designed utility applications, and then they just started making like Switch video games that are like super indie core romance, like introspection A24 style games, and then they made a hardware device, but like the utility software still slaps alongside.
That's wild. I did not know that history. And then they got Teenage Engineering, right, to design the hardware for
Uh,
the.
Oh,
I mean,
really?
they
That
also
makes
made
so much
Untitled.
sense. I did not realize that.
Yeah.
And Untitled Goose Game, I didn't realize was theirs.
Oh,
What?
really? Wow.
Oh, that's another one we could do. All right, all right. Okay,
Hmm.
that's going to be an episode at some point.
Maybe actually, Untitled Goose Game's good to think about in relationship to Katamari as like kind of going
Mm,
around this town, the kind of comedy that comes out of
Mhm.
interacting with like with a town, with the elements of the town. Like I think about Untitled Goose Game really in terms of the interaction with that farmer and the little boy.
Mhm.
Like that those are like the and this is just you're there are all these characters that um stiffer maybe like less personality, less animations than in Untitled Goose Game, but it feels like um an outgrowth of Katamari maybe.
Yeah, very similar energy.
and also this kind of mischievous, like kind of mischievous, causing chaos in a small world, and a kind of a
Yes.
little bit of like a pastoral kind of vibe.
So I have a question
And
for you
obviously art
guys.
style.
Do you think like what do you think this game is about? Do you think this game is about something? Oof.
Whoa, careful, Mitch.
I'm
I mean, I
ready.
The
kind of would say it's something to
yeah,
do with the like there's childlike wonder kind of attitude about just like looking at the your big backyard, you know, the normal everyday things with like renewed interest and sort of I think there's I think this is why it's accessible. You know, it's your bedroom. It's the small nitty-gritty nothings of the world, and actually like there's something really lovable and special about like the most benign objects that surround you, and like sort of imbuing them with slightly more character and just like personality, and be like, actually, you know, a little lighter that's on the ground. Like, I love that little guy,
Yeah.
and I'm really just gonna like embrace that. Feel like that has a big element, but I don't know if I would go as far as say that like there's a purpose to it. You know, I guess a purpose would be like to instill certain feelings or emotions, which you know also are frustration and excitement and appreciation. The childlike wonder being the other one, but I mean, the purpose of any game is to get people to play it. Games have a
Mhm.
pretty concrete, you know, like objective. They're commercial objects in that way, which is really sort of clarifying. And of course, the background of the creator, sort of obvious breaking of bounds where this fits in. I don't really like trying to pin down purposes in general. I think that's a really tough. Even the person who made it probably wouldn't want you to.
I
Well,
think about with like gameplay mechanics, like where you can kind of can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I go past this? Can I push on this? And I feel like this is a game that, like, if thinking about something else we talked about before, like Infinite Craft,
mhm.
or like where it's like, let me see what happens when I put these two words together. Let's see what happens when I do these two words together. This is kind of a kinetic version of that, where you're like, can I touch this yet? Nope, can't touch that yet. Can I touch this
yeah,
yet?
Mhm.
And that like that is the kind of the secret or like the poke that you keep doing. Um, at least that's how I relate to this game, and that's separate of like the art direction, the score, which is like amazing, like the kind of being placed in Japan in a way that like at the time when I saw it, I hadn't had no kind of context for like what living spaces in Japan looked like or what like a small town center might like it's like this is all guesses, right? It's like it's still but it was yeah.
yeah. No, I agree with that, and I think like the I feel like in turn, I don't know if I would put this in a purpose category, but to Billy's point, like there is this pure playfulness of playing with things in the environment kind of in ways that they're not intended, right? Like, oh, these, you know, park benches could be something that I could roll up into a sculpture, you know, or like I could roll up a duck into a giant ball of humans and ducks and benches. I think there's something in that. And then, but I think to Travis, your point, like for me, the pure pleasure of this is this kind of push and pull of like pushing into resistance and like, can I roll up the bush yet? Oh, the bush is a little too big. now I can roll up the bush. Like, and seeing the bushes get like doop, 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 rolled into the Katamari after you've been like, the bush was an obstacle. I couldn't, or like now, right? The train previously was like a threat. Now you're like as big as the train. So now I'm gonna like roll. Soon I'll be able to roll up the train. You know, the train was pushing me around. Now I can roll up the train. Like right here, you go up a level, and you're like, okay, now we can really so that kind of resistance and pushback, and then like overcoming that breaking through of resistance is like such a pure, pleasurable, kind of like visceral, satisfying feeling that I feel like is like really at the heart of this.
Yeah, and I also just want to say, like the game, like Katamari doesn't really become peak Katamari until you're big enough to roll up people. Like it's when you can roll
Yeah.
up people, that's when you feel really powerful. Like this game really rules. For me, the game is always just about trying to get big enough that I can roll people up into my ball. It is funny actually, thinking about it. When I look at this ball that I've rolled up, all the accumulated stuff, I know we've all seen sculptures that look almost exactly like this. The sort of like aggregated ball of found junk is definitely a trope, I think, in the contemporary sculpture world.
It's very contemporary art.
Yeah,
Like,
you do. Um, but like back to meaning, and for me, it's like a bigger philosophical discussion because, I agree, Billy, with what you were saying, but and we were having a conversation about this earlier in the week. Like, I am learning how to agree with it. And one of the nice things that's come out of me like playing video games more often and more seriously and just approaching them with what you often call generous the generous open mind, right? Being willing to engage with these things as something other than their supposed or obvious function, right? Is realizing like, yeah, how much this is probably not about anything, and that's really really for the best. It opens, you can approach this if you're suitably generous, you can approach this thing of this as being about consumerism or capitalism, kind of rolling everything up, consuming all because the king of all cosmos insists that you do. But it's just a possibility space of not just things you can roll up in a ball, but ideas that you can have about it, I guess. Um, and it's funny because in art, like, because I, started making my little games as art. What does this guy want from me? Since I started making my little games as art, like, I really do have it burnt into my brain that they've got to be about something. I started this project. It's like, it's going to be a game, and it's going to be, and it's going to be about the Cultural Revolution or something. And that's a very much like a visual art world requirement, right? And it takes some training to let go of that.
yeah, I think Katamari is a lovely example of not that, or like whatever it's about is it's a very delicate, nuanced, and hard to describe flavor, right? It's definitely not like, doesn't have that kind of didactic, clear, uh, message, which I think gives it a lot of richness and complexity.
Yeah. And that's, yeah, being comfortable enough doing that is something that I'm still really learning how to do as an artist and as an art critic and someone who thinks about who thinks about art and wants to write and talk about art.
I think it just
Um,
opens up way more possibilities too, because if if it's a one liner, if this artwork, the purpose of this thing is to do this thing, cool. I transfer that message and we're over. Whereas
Yeah.
like if it's just approaching variables with an attitude, you know what I mean? Like each decision sort of like is led by desired feelings and desired sort of opinions about scenarios or something, but it doesn't ever lock it into needing to be a certain way or another way. It sort of compounds in the directions that correlate with that attitude itself. And I feel like when I was describing it, those are the attitudes that I feel like come through it, or like the value system of the person who's designing this world. But it's not like the goal is to make sure that these attitudes are handed down and that you understand them perfectly from the beginning. It's more like if you approach these scenarios with this, then you'll have results which resonate with things that you like or something. And I feel like that's a really liberating concept for approaching creating work too.
Yeah, and what you just described is something that is hard to do in visual art, and I think has gotten harder as we've entered a more saturated and distracting media environment. I think it's very hard for what we have traditionally thought of as visual art to produce empathy in the way that it was successful at, a century ago, when people, might only see like 3 images in an entire day, right? When our entire visual culture is different. And I think that is why the fine art world does bring with it, like, as a term of engagement, a requirement to be about something. And purely emotional or empathetic art tends to not do very well in the art world today. Like, art world that is about feelings, or art that is about feelings, doesn't really get much uh doesn't really get much attention or care, I think, in the contemporary art world. But we have video games where I think that becomes a lot more possible again. I think video games are an inherently empathetic um medium, in the really simple sense that, like, when somebody has the controller in their hands, like, they are the character. Like, there's an astonishing amount of empathy that happens, and it's just a better medium in the year 2024 for trying to convey a sentiment or an attitude or a feeling like what you've been describing.
That reminds me, this is a little weird one, but we should discuss on this topic of empathy. Soren Johnson, who was the lead designer on Civilization for a while, maybe still is, working for Firaxis, has a very, very good GDC talk about the problems with this narrative. There was a period of, I don't know, 5-10 years where a lot of indie game people were really trying to say video games are empathy machines, and this is why they're socially relevant, and we're going to teach people to love the homeless by letting you play as a homeless person. And there's a great, I won't do it full justice, but there's a great anecdote from the Soren Johnson talk where he's talking about somebody made a sweatshop game, and where you are running a sweatshop and kind of doing terrible things to the workers, and it felt like the intended purpose was this kind of like liberal, like sweatshops are bad kind of message. But a bunch of the players came out of it being like, you know what? Actually, running a sweatshop is a lot of work. It's kind of really hard to be the boss of the sweatshop. And like, so this empathy got like displaced in this strange way. And it's a very good kind of discussion about this point and the ways that like this is really complicated, and that not kind of like that games are not an easy way to deliver these kind of like straightforward like empathy payloads. It would be fun for us to maybe, I don't know, it's like a long talk, so I don't know if, obviously it's great for the stream, but we could talk about it a little bit.
No, so I'm very interested in that conversation, and I hear two things here. One is this standard, oh my gosh, this is just the sort of like standard like tech bro attitude of universalizing or like TED Talkifying anything that can be true under the right circumstances. Because yes, like, I do believe that interactive media can be empathy machines. I think like big, 10,000-foot blue sky tech thinkers tend to underestimate all of the granular decisions and precision and skill that is required to make that true. That truth, the game is empathy machine, can fail at so many tiny parts based on your interactivity design and your game design and your graphics and things like that. It's not a given that every game is an empathy machine.
You're a great piece of poop, Mitch.
I am. So
Are you?
yeah, let's
Yeah, can we
talk
check in
about.
on what's been going on in the
How
stream for a second?
empathetic do you feel? Can you empathize with this green piece of poop now?
Okay,
Do you
so
know what it
this
feels
is
like?
let's talk about what's happening. So this is Watam, which is, we think, Takahashi's next game after Katamari. I had never played this before this week. Doing some research, I see that it had what is often called a troubled development cycle. Um,
Yeah.
got dropped by a few publishers before eventually getting picked up by Annapurna, which is like, I mean, we're going to cover a lot of Annapurna games. Um, I only played this for maybe 30 minutes before. And this is a really good example. Well, it's going to be a good example of something. Here's what's happening. You load up this game, Watam. You have no idea what is going on. You start off as this little guy called the mayor with a hat, and there's a rock, and you pick it up. The controls that you can do, there's buttons for holding hands. But you see so I use my right stick to be these different characters on this teeny tiny little island. All right. The square button holds left hand and the circle button holds right hand. So I can hold up to two creatures' hands. Then I can make them also hold hand. There, now I have like a little triangle of people. Now they say, ha 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 ha. And they're dancing around, and sometimes dancing around in a circle is what I need to do, but sometimes not. Right now, all the characters have been turned into poop because this thing, which looks like a creamsicle, but actually is a tree, I guess if it eats fruit, it will poop. All these creatures used to be different things. They used to be like rocks or a square or something, but now they're poop because the tree ate them and then pooped them out. And now they all want more poop. Now, this is not the primary gameplay loop. This is not like this is not like the Wim Savoy Cloaca video game adaptation where we are here to just make cute poops. Every time you do something, there seems to be a different objective. So right now, I gotta eat a fruit. Now maybe I can poop it out. There we go. No, what does that do? I'm never really sure what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, okay, now up in the top right, I have two poops, and I think I need to make four poops, but I don't know how. Like, I just don't know how to make more poops. Like these guys, is he come? No, look, now I only have one poop. Ugh. It's a really puzzling game. I have no idea what I'm doing right now. Oh, there's a poop up there?
This was a little bit my experience when I played Nobi Nobi Boy, where it
Okay.
was just like, well, this is funny and weird, but like because the core mechanic wasn't nearly as engaging as Katamari, it's like the whole formula was like off balance, and I feel like Katamari hit that balance perfectly. And there's just like there's some piece of like the compelling action to a little bit to what I'm witnessing right here and what I remember from Nobi Nobi Boy that like in some ways like puts these back into the category of like, oh, like these are interesting conceptually, but like maybe not fantastic games.
Yeah.
Well,
I feel like in some ways this feels more like a kind of an interactive art installation than it feels like a game. Maybe to its detriment, which is kind of an interesting maybe theme to explore on the art versus games axis.
okay, I just figured it out. This orifice is what eats and poops. It makes sense. He's a mouth and an anus. And he wants broccoli and he wants to eat it and then he wants to poop it and everyone else wants me to
Nice.
poop it, so that's what I'm gonna do. Um, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say, all right. So here's a big difference. Hopefully, I'll get to a different game. Borrow. Okay, now I can borrow. I can borrow that hat. I can borrow that hat. I need one more poop. I'm gonna poop. Eat this guy. No, no, no. Okay, so triangle button didn't make him eat. First, it made him put the hat on him, and it speaks to the problem of the game. In Katamari, all you do is roll things up into balls, and rolling things
Yeah.
up into balls is awesome, right? There's only one thing to do. Okay, now this guy wants me to kaboom. All right, so this now I know how to kaboom. I remember how to kaboom. All right, so now first I had to eat to poop with these different characters, and I'm having difficulty. There we go, finding the character who can kaboom. Um, I'm always doing different things. I'm never sure what I'm supposed to be doing or why. I've never have any idea what's happening. Whoops. This guy, they all want to kaboom. I think I can do. There you go. If you take off your hat, you explode. But don't worry, everybody likes it. Everybody's super happy about it. It's not a bad thing.
Is this a toilet?
I don't.
Flying toilet?
Is it?
Oh yeah, the poop is gonna go in the toilet.
What the?
It's funny to think of this like poop funny logic compared to Skibbity Toilet, where like one is sort of like, uh, oh, I'm doing poop things, and like that's bad. Whereas Skibbity Toilet's like, and like it lands in a way that I don't know if it's like more primary or something. Maybe there's just like less. It's more accessible because it's less complicated.
Well, first of all, which is more accessible?
Skibbity.
Yeah, this is.
Well, also Skibbity Toilet is really importantly. Skibbity Toilet is a video, not a game, right? So it's a linear narrative, which I do think makes that um, a lot easier. I do think like something that we're seeing with this is for me, one of the key pleasures of a game is to be able to form an intent and then execute that intent,
Mhm.
right? So if you're like going back to Balatro, right? If you're like, I'm gonna make a straight build, right? Like I'm gonna go
Mhm.
for straights, and then you're like, ooh, I got a card that will let me make my straight build better. And then I drew some cards, I drew a straight, and I got a 1,000,000 point hand, right? And then that got like paid off, right? Whereas with this, if you don't, even if it's pleasant touching the buttons and watching the animations and the visuals, if you don't have the ability to form a clear intent of like, okay, I want to get all these poops into a toilet, if you don't know that that's your intent, when it pays off, it's not very satisfying, right? And it's more random, and you're kind of like clicking every pixel on the screen to try to unlock something, but it doesn't. You're not like building a mental model of a world and then like forming intents about it.
Yeah, like so right now. First of all, I also want to say in the first like 30 minutes of this game that I played before the
I do love
stream
these characters.
featured zero poops. So literally the poop stuff started just when I reloaded for you guys. But look, right now, okay, everybody's saying more golden poop. I'm a toilet, I can flush, but I'm not really. I'm flushing them. I'm not sure that it does anything. So look, I flush them. They just come back out here, and those four icons in the top right are not changing. So I'm not sure. Okay, so now I'm Jessica. I don't know what Jessica is. Poop comes out of Jessica's a pipe, and poop comes out of Jessica after I flush poops down the toilet. Like this is um yeah. I don't I can't actually form an intent, much less like try to actualize my intent in a satisfying way.
It combines the same game loop as Katamari, where it's about can I do this? Can I combine this? Is it but the output's different and the kind of control is like slightly different. We get the same kind of UI of seeing the front of the thing
Oh.
all the time on the bottom left, but now it's like actually watching you play this makes me really want to play it. Like I'm getting like I want to be like it feels like a knowing the verbs and knowing how to combine the verbs will lead to something. Um, the thing about it is though is that like where does this go? Like it does like in Katamari you end up doing it with the universe. Does this scale the same way? Like have y'all seen the end of this or the limits of this game before?
No, so far 30 minutes in, I've only ever been on a square that is about this big and there are these characters. It's I don't do they it's is it that they want more golden poops? Maybe if I go back to being this guy, I can turn more things into poops and that'll make people happy.
There's
I
something
feel
about the
like
simplicity of Katamari's like drive that you immediately intuit that like this can just keep going. Like I can keep pushing
Yes.
this objective further and further. And actually similar Nobi Nobi Boy had that to a degree where you're like, I have to make this worm longer. And like I guess I could just keep making this longer indefinitely. And like that builds. Whereas like what is and maybe there's something about the design language that you need to balance, like potentially wild chaotic language and content with like an extremely simple mechanism, otherwise they become skewed or something.
I do think that that's an important point that both of you guys are touching on. There's a really good book by Naomi Klein and Anna Anthropy called I'll pull it up. It's something like Introduction to Game Design. It's got like a really basic title. And they each wrote half of the book. I highly recommend it if you're interested in these kind of things. And in Anthropy's half of the book, she writes about how we have to people think about games a lot of the time in terms of narrative of the literal story of the characters on the screen, but that actually thinking about game design as a kind of almost a character development of verbs, right? So if you start out with the ability to, let's say we have a puzzle platformer, right? You start out with the ability to run and jump, and then you're kind of developing those running and jumping or maybe solving puzzles, right? And you're developing more and more complex puzzles over the course of the game. So this kind of development in the action that the player is doing, and they're building up a vocabulary of skills and they're deploying them against increasingly complex or nuanced situations, right? And I think with Katamari, you have a clear idea of there is a clear character arc from the very beginning, and that's in the level, or there's a very clear development of verb arc, right? It's clear in the level. I'm going to get bigger. I'm going to roll up more things. So that's very satisfying when it happens. You're like, ooh, imagine if I get big enough to roll up a cat, right? Oh, that's going to be sick. And then when it pays off, you're like, I wanted to roll up that cat, and now I did. And then you can scale that across multiple levels where it's like, okay, in this level, I get as big as a cat, and then I get as big as a dog, and then I get as big as a person, and then I can roll up a house, and then the planets and the universe, right? And your mind very easily follows that arc, right? Whereas with something like this, where at least and I admit I really don't know that much about this game, and I had a kind of it's funny, Travis, like you watching this makes you want to play it. Totally candidly, me watching this makes me not want to play it. This would be really frustrating to me. It doesn't feel systematic. It feels random. It feels like a series of set pieces that are disconnected, at least from what I can see, right? Like it doesn't feel like I learned how to make poops and now I'm learning how to take poops and build conveyor belts for them or something. It's like I learned how to make poops. Now I have to go learn how to make apples, right? And to me, that doesn't I don't have that itch that I want to scratch. It's more like a series of vignettes or set pieces, which to me doesn't feel game like in a way that I'm like find appealing.
There are only 4 speedruns for this on Speedrun Archives, and their times are around an hour and 43 minutes. And if you look on
Wow.
YouTube for casual runs of it, it seems to be around 3 hours. So it's like
Hmm.
like Let's Play style, two and a half to 3.5 hour long.
That's actually appealing. I mean, I love a good 3 hour game where you can see the whole thing in 3 hours. I do like that. So that actually kind of renews my interest a little bit.
Well, Matt, I have the exact same perspective as you. Like it's not systematic, and and you laid it out, really well. That um, what Katamari is so great at is always it puts the next possibility right in front of you so you can see it, right? You understand what is the next ability that you are going to unlock, the ability to roll up a person. Your ball is only 30 centimeters away from being able to roll up a person, and then you will have that power. As you said, that's what great video games do. They dangle in front of you, not the promise of gold or points. Most people, care less about that in today's era of gaming. They tantalize you with a new power and a new ability. In this game, the next power, the next ability, the next thing we are going to be able to do it's not teased to us as much as it's just told to us. I don't
Yeah,
know that after I make a stack as tall as the bowling pin, that I'm going to be able to transform into a bowling ball and knock it over. I don't know what's going to
right.
happen. As soon as I'm done making a stack as tall as a bowling pin, they're just going to tell me to do another thing.
And also, I think really key in that analysis about ability and abilities and powers is combinatorics,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I could get the ability to turn into a stack of bowling pins and fly, right? Now those two powers combined together might unlock some new interesting play space, right? But if it's I turn into a bowling pin and now I turn into a toilet and now I turn into an apple, they're like discrete little boxes of possibility and play that are not stacking and combining, which I think is like, you know, going back to Balatro again, Balatro is so pleasurable because you're stacking and combining. Every step of the game is stacking, is another thin stack of like, oh, now I've got a buff for hearts, and I've got a buff for flushes, and I've got a buff for face cards, right? And it's stacking and stacking and stacking and combining. And now, like, if I get that one card that's all three of those things, it's gonna set off fireworks.
I mean, in that regard, just to one more time celebrate the game mechanic of accumulation, I think it's worth mentioning some of the other sort of games that took that and ran, especially those from the game company. I think it's what it's called, or that
Mm-hmm.
game company. Is it called Spore? No, the
Flow.
one where you're like Flow.
Yeah. Where
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
like an
Flow.
amoeba
Flow.
kind of.
Exactly, which was also pretty early. I mean, it was one of the first like browser games that I think I spent quite a lot of time in, just accumulating larger and larger, becoming a larger and larger multi-celled organism by accumulating smaller and smaller ones. And then there was the flower one, where you're sort of like a cloud of flower petals that are accumulating larger and larger. I feel like this is just such a solid mechanic. That I would love to like celebrate it. Sky was the other one where you're accumulating as a cloud. I think you get like become a larger and larger cloud.
Yeah.
Like it just feels good, and I think that it hits this sweet spot in between these kind of like meditative games, or I don't know, walking simulator might be the correct category for these ones that are sort of just like purposeless but kind of nice to be in. But like still with purpose, still having this kind of like ludic drive, like oh, like there is a game loop here, but it's so simple or direct that it still feels like I'm almost just meditating or like having a sort of reflective, responsive reaction to it.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
I,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't want to make a habit of this. I know it feels like I have been a bit, but I have to drop early and wanted that to be my kind of like final shout out in this spectrum of topics today here. So the rest of you all to hopefully close it and land the bird without me.
It was a good
Hey,
final
Billy.
thought. Thanks, Billy. We'll see you next week.
So,
Yeah, I think to jump off his point, one of the things that makes those accumulation games, including Katamari, so satisfying is that it's visual, right? It's this visual feedback of you, this direct connection, right? Of like, I pick up more things, I get bigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like this, it's very satisfying, direct, intuitive result of your actions. I mean, one of the things that like, you know, when we were working on our game Night Run, one of the corners I realized we had painted ourselves into was that there was there was no kind of like visual sense of progress for the player in the
Mm-hmm.
world, right? It was like you kind of were, except for like seeing a number, an indicator on the screen, right? You
Mm-hmm.
weren't like getting bigger or seeing colors changing, or, it was kind of this like, the player did not feel like they were having a visual impact on the world, which I do feel like is one very satisfying. I mean, this is why killing is such a
Mm-hmm.
popular mechanic in games, is because you come in, there's a room full of guys, you kill them, now they're all dead. And like some of the best implementations of it, which feel really bloody minded, but games like Hotline Miami, right, where they leave all the blood spatters and dead bodies strewn about the level, and you get to like walk back through the level at the end and see all the people you killed, and really satisfying to like see what you did in the world, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And like these games, I think of Katamari this way as well. It's an aestheticized number go up game, right? Like that's what, that visual impact in the world often is. Those accumulation games, I just think of them as aesthetic number go up. We get to see something get bigger, and we want to make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And it makes perfect sense to me. This has no trace of that. I can't, I can't tell what I've done or what I'm doing, or if anything that I'm doing is good. Um,
Yeah, and even Nobi Nobi Boy, in contrast to this, you were like stretching the Nobi Nobi Boy character and it was getting longer and longer. It kind of fit that format, right? It was like, okay, it's getting longer. I'm doing something, right? Whereas here, it's like, do we feel like we're really doing something? Are we succeeding? Are we progressing? It's hard to tell.
yeah, and yeah, yeah, and like you say, there's also just no system, and its systems are what's really satisfying. Anyway, I think this is really instructive to play, because I mean, I will just say it, like this is bad. Like this is a bad game. Like it's a bad experience. And the fact that it could retain so many of the qualities that Katamari has, that make Katamari wonderful, such as this irreverent tone and art style. The vibes seem like they should be the same. So the fact that this is bad teaches me a lot about what is required to make a good video game that does that thing I was talking about accepting and acknowledging as a valid, artwork or use of the medium, whatever you want to call it, which is the transmission of a vibe or sensibility, right, or empathy. Like this is all happy and cheerful and funny, but it doesn't make me feel happy and cheerful and funny like the way that Katamari does. And the reason is like that invisible cruddy stuff, which is the system that you're describing, right? It's also why that tech guy who's talking about, video games as empathy machines, like, that guy needs to be reminded, like, it's not that simple. You look at this on paper, it should have everything that we need to uplift, the user, and just make someone's day, and be about happiness and cheerfulness. But because it has the pink colors, and it has the little poops, and it has the smiley faces and the hearts, right? But it doesn't have that nitty gritty mechanics, which is like the actual invisible, like, soup base that makes all that stuff work together.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really, I mean, not to bag on this too much, right? But I do think that it is very illustrative of also I like the aesthetics of this, right?
Yeah, me
Visually, I
too.
think this is pleasing and has a certain elegance to it, and there's some nice visual moments, right? But if you have only that, absent a kind of some kind of rich mechanical structure for the player to engage with, uh, especially since this does feel like it's offering the promise of a video game. It is kind of visually idiomatic to video games, so you kind of feel like, oh, maybe it's a 3D platformer. Maybe I'm going to get to collect some coins, right? Like, and then that doesn't pay off, um, feels frustrating.
But you know what else this reminds me of? It makes me think of, and I mean, this is such an obvious point, but I think it's important, is like, obviously, we all like love Takahashi. We all think Katamari is just that it's brilliant. It's like Billy said, it feels like a creation from exact first principles. That is so hard to do, to create something that feels wholly original and almost not at all iterative on anything you've seen before. And, then when I look at this follow up work, you really realize how hard that is.
Yeah,
Like actually, and you can see this struggling to try to invent something brand new again, right? Like to try to be a
yeah.
completely new experience again. And man, you are lucky if you get one of those bolts of inspiration, and then the opportunity to follow through on that bolt of inspiration. You get one of those in a lifetime, you're really lucky. and 2 just almost never happens. It's like getting struck by lightning twice.
I do think there's an interesting, I don't know if this is fair, but the dynamic of somebody who had a big and super successful first hit
Yeah.
and then maybe being a little bit, um, maybe there's a little bit of hubris in this, right? That he had a big first hit. There were certainly a lot of people after Katamari um, saying how brilliant he was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the idea was, okay, I'm really gonna do something radical. And I think you can see kind of in his biography, there was a little bit of tension with video games that like
Mm-hmm.
he left and wanted to go do sculpture and probably making Katamari for Namco, there was some commercial tension there, or some pressure to make something more normal, which actually may have been productive in that case. Um, and then he was like, okay, now because Watam was made, I'm pretty sure as part of Phenomena with it was made in San Francisco, and Robin Hunicke, who was a kind of a indie game luminary. She was a producer, and they were, I think, fully independent. And so it may have been a little bit of like he kind of got all the freedom that he wanted, and maybe it was a little too much freedom, too few constraints, and kind of like went off the reservation a little bit.
Yeah, classic like second album syndrome. Or it's this whole game does feel have a little bit of the feeling of what we call in basketball a heat check. You just throw one up from way downtown because you feel like everything you shoot's going in.
Yeah, I do think there may be some dimension of that. I don't know if that's uncharitable to say or whatever, but or maybe an earnest attempt to
Mhm.
say, okay, let's go further. Let's really do something really revolutionary or transgressive. Move away from this very goal-oriented framework of games, and finding out that hey, actually, maybe the goal-oriented part was good.
Yeah. No, I'm struggling right now. I can't figure out what to do. I have to connect this telephone with its receiver, and I cannot. I do not know where the receiver is or what is going on. Um,
I mean, I do think this is also interesting to situate within the context of the indie games movement, right?
mhm.
Because like the indie games movement has really um, been characterized by obviously being inside the games industry, but also to some degree being kind of critical and rejectionist of some of the core tropes of the, call it the mainstream or AAA games industry, right? Like one of the tropes of indie games was this kind of colorful childlike aesthetic, right? That which was like an explicit rejection of the kind of brown and gray grimacing doom man
Mhm.
corridor blood and guns aesthetic of the early 2000s that was so totally dominant. And I remember anecdotes about that game company when they were showing Cloud. It was like the only game that was like bright blue in like a room full of games that were like brown. It was like
Huh.
brown with
Yeah.
blood.
I watching it play out, I think about Ian Chang's simulations. Like I think about like the difference between this and Katamari is that Katamari was like I'm thinking about the relationship of Katamari to Crazy Taxi and how kinetic and fast that is, and how here like even in the simulation they're all kind of just sitting and staring at you, and its absence of the movement of Katamari. Um, but the thing that I like about it, or that it hints at, the same way that I think of with a lot of kind of simulations, is like seeing what happens when these different elements get together, seeing like how they might interact, like the kind of ant colony of it or something, like that this implies, but I guess it's not really fulfilling. Like it's not, you know. I feel like when I first saw this, like everything was walking around and talking to each other, and they were. But now everyone just seems to kind of be staring at you, and I don't know if that's because like we're in a new kind of part of the game or something.
Yeah.
Um, I see I guess it's like I'm not playing it, so it's kind of hard. But it's like I see a possibility here. Like I see something that I'm really interested to like watch the speed run now to see like what actually like the game mechanics are going forward. Uh, the reviews of it are pretty rough, right? In terms of like how people like even just like player reviews respond to it. But
Yeah. I like the comparison to Ian Cheng here because this definitely has some of the, like, to Ian Cheng's like Voyagers or something, this feeling of this little, even the perspective and all the little characters running around, a little bit of the diorama world. And actually, maybe this would have been better if it was self-playing, like an Ian Cheng piece, right? That like if these characters were running around and like eating each other and pooping each other out, and you were kind of watching this system of mechanics play out, and that could have been interesting. Obviously, it wouldn't have been a commercial video game at that point, but um, I do think your point about, it's funny, when I first saw the platform, I was like, oh, it's like devil daggers with little cute fruits, right? This very
that
constrained space, right?
sounds great.
But yeah, right. But like the fact that we're not getting change in the environment is also tough visually,
Hmm.
right? It's
Yeah,
like it contributes
yeah,
to the feeling of stasis, right? Even if just
yeah.
we were on a different colored platform. Obviously, these big other platforms, the toilet and so on, and the bowling alley come and join us, which does give us some feeling of visual progression. But the overall, if I like looked at this versus having looked at it an hour ago in the gameplay,
Yeah.
have things changed? I don't, I can't tell, you know?
And I don't know if it was either if it who which of y'all mentioned like it being in development hell.
Yeah.
Um, do any of y'all have any insight into that? Like when I'm looking at this now, maybe there's a lot that we can critique about it. It makes me wonder if that was part of it. If that like what kind of are we looking at a compromised version of this? Are we looking at like
I'm sure we are to some degree, or I mean, actually, a friend of mine worked on this, and I remember hearing from him. It was all like NDA and secret, so I didn't get any like real details. But I just remember hearing him being like, "Yeah, we're really, really like it's really rough. We're really struggling." Like, I just remember it being tough, and I think probably a lot of that was, my guess is, Takahashi being married to this concept and this concept kind of not working, right?
mm,
Like,
mm,
and them trying to, this is me interpreting, right? But as we can see, this is not this would be a cool concept to build a 5 minute vignette, little, maybe a part of a bigger game or some, something, but as a multi-hour experience of being on this platform and trying to figure out these slightly random interactions, um it's not a great idea to build a whole commercial game on, right? Or this could be like a game jam game or something smaller
Hmm.
or an art piece or any number of other things, but it doesn't seem to have enough on the bones verb wise and interaction wise um to make a commercial scale game. And my guess, and then probably what was happening is, as you alluded to, Mitch, they got dropped by multiple partner publishers. My guess is they were hitting milestones with publishers, delivering it to them, and they were like, "What the fuck is this?"
Hmm. Well, okay.
And then not renewing their funding.
I want to come and follow up on everything you just said, but first, I think we're at the key. I think this is a key moment. This is the make or break moment for should I continue exploring this game or give up on it? Because I've somehow just produced by my tree ate something, and so now I have a nose, and over there is a poop. And this is I'm gonna create a new rule about video game assessment. We're gonna call this the Mitch rule, which is that if you can control a nose, you can control a poop. If these two characters don't have a custom interaction with each other, then I think we can say that this is the failure of a game. All right. What happens if the nose smells the poop? Oh, okay, good. He got dizzy. All right. Okay, so it's not a total waste. And if he smells this, all right, he's happy. Okay. Um, all right. Well, that was good. At least if they hadn't have done that, I would have been able to. Oh, what happens if the nose goes on top of the mouth? Like I just keep on wanting to think maybe there's something here. Um, now I have a nose on top of a mouth. Um, anyway, we'll see. Um, yeah, to what you were saying, my guess is here's the thing, and I know like I'm being very ungenerous about this game, but I think it's warranted, and I'm very generous about Katamari, and I'm also respect that artists are very prone to falling into exactly what you've just described, where sometimes I've done it a whole bunch of times. I become enamored with a concept, even though the concept, even in my own brain, is really nebulous and not fully formed, but you just
Yeah.
believe that somehow something will ossify like in that mush of an idea.
uh, this is me every day right now, literally every
Yeah,
day.
right. And look, sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't, right? But with this, like I'm
Digging
inclined to
yourself deeper and deeper and deeper.
Mhm.
Yes.
I'm inclined to think that like this is pretty much the artist's vision because he jumped around studios so many times, right? It's whenever you're committed to sticking it through to like Sony or Namco or whatever, and then they, take the project away from you, that's when you get not the director's vision, right? But when the director is taking it to another studio and like I don't know the industry on the level that you know it, but I think Anna Perna's reputation as being very creative, creator friendly. Um,
Yeah.
I tend to think this is basically him kind of following his vision as far as he could.
Yeah, I do think it feels uncompromising.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe not in a good way in this case.
So that's our. I feel like this is a good place to leave it. Have a nice little kind of 90-minute episode this week. And
Great.
any final thoughts on Katamari or what Tom?
I mean, I can say I think that it's been a very illustrative. Putting the two next to each other is really interesting, and I think brings out the gameness of these works in the sense that one really, really succeeds on its merits as a game and is supported by its wonderful visual aesthetics, kooky narrative, and great music, whereas the other kind of has many of those fun, charming aesthetic trappings, but due to its lack of kind of structural skeleton of gameplay, really falls flat.
Same.
Yeah, I'd say it's like it's made me think about play in the way that as Billy was saying, that after he made Katamari, he wanted to go make a playground or
Mm.
children's like play equipment. And I think about the kind of genre of children's play equipment. When you look at it, it's like an amorphous shape, and you're like, "Wait, how are kids like? Are they supposed to like swing from that? Like, what do they do with that? What do they do with this piece of plastic?" And so I'm bringing that energy to Wadham right now. Like, what do you do with that? Who
Yeah.
is it for? Because like with a 5-year old, if you just look at him straight in the face and say poop, that's great. That's gold,
It is
right?
great.
It's
Works every
gold. And so
time.
it's like yeah, so I'm like that's the part that I'm kind of struggling with, and like I feel like I actually really want to dig into Wadham now because of this. Um and yeah, and I think that what Matt's bringing up about this kind of looking at these two things from this one artist, and how they've kind of the different the different responses to it
Yeah.
is has been a really great pairing. I would say like it's nice to look at these together. It
I
makes me
do
want to
think
go
that's
play
an
Crazy
important,
Taxi as well. It's like I'm like okay, I
yeah.
need to go back to Crazy Taxi, maybe with the music off, but I need to go back to it.
I do think and this should have been brought up earlier. Takahashi did talk about that. I think what Watam was kind of something about like his son. He wanted something to play with his young son. So I do think actually it should be looked at probably as a game for small kids. Whether it succeeds in that way or not, I don't know. But I do think that that's actually a key point, and that's like a important lens to look through it through that you mentioned there, Travis. maybe playing it with a 5-year-old is a great experience, you know.
I think that's what I got to do now.
Yeah, maybe I'll give that a shot. I played Katamari with my 5-year-old last night, and it went over pretty well. Maybe we'll try Wadham after this. Um, all right, well, that's really fun. I think great points. I also learned a lot putting these games together. I learned, you know, uh, as we play all these games, I'm learning to let go of some of my expectations from the art world about being about stuff, and I'm learning to more embrace the idea that these things you make really can be just sort of about, creating sensory experiences, and that's totally valid. But putting these together like shows me what's necessary to do that. Like it's not honestly like making a painting that's just about your feelings is really easy, and making a video game that's just about sort of fun and feelings is actually really hard. And I think in contrasting these games, we've recognized exactly how hard it is because we've seen where it can go right and where it can go really wrong.
Finally, is it art?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I kind of think, yeah. I mean, I think given it's interesting, or you know what I would say is that maybe Wadham is more of a pure art object than Katamari, and worse for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to say.
Games wins this episode.
Games wins. All right. Games versus art. Games wins. That's so disappointing. All right, guys. I'll see y'all next week.
Take care. See ya.
Thanks.
Bye.
All right, later.